The year is 1520. Our scene opens on a Spanish ship about to arrive in Central America, home to dense populations. The perfect conditions for the thriving of smallpox.
Healer, I've been experiencing horrible symptoms. I've been vomiting and had bad headache and fever, and I also have this rash. I feel awful. Please just make the pain go away.
When did you first start noticing these symptoms?
The headaches have been going on for 4 days along with the vomiting and fever. I just noticed this rash this morning.
This is a nasty rash. We'll have to isolate you to make sure it doesn't spread to anyone else. But beyond that, I'm afraid there's not much we can do to make you feel better. We have wet washcloths that might bring the fever down, and if you stop scratching that itch, it will eventually scab over and fall away.
There's nothing else you can do to make it go away.
Just get some rest and don't itch. You will be fine. The Lord will save you.
Although attempts were made to heal the infected passenger, there were no effective medications or vaccines available at this time. As a result, the infected passenger arrived in South America, and the smallpox disease spread rapidly throughout the continent. It demolished empires and wiped out entire native populations.
I'm here today with Dr. Ferry, a historian who specializes in epidemics in South American history. What do you think was the cause of smallpox in South America, and why was it so especially devastating for the natives?
Well, smallpox in the Americas was a direct result of the European conquests. The first Spanish ships that landed on American soil contained strains of smallpox virus. At this point, most populations of the Eurasian world had built up an immunity to ancient diseases such as smallpox. However, New World populations weren't previously exposed to smallpox and hadn't built up an immunity. So when European ships and diseases arrived, smallpox was a huge biological shock to American populations.
How did this biological shock and mass genocide affect South American history?
The arrival of smallpox in the Americas was a clear turning point in American history. Smallpox, along with other European diseases, killed nearly 90% of Native Americans. The Americas were practically emptied of native peoples at this point.
It's October 2nd, 2014. Dr. Nicole Gaspari is meeting with an Ebola patient who was an aid worker helping to treat Thomas Eric Duncan, the first person diagnosed with Ebola in the U.S., Riley Lehman. Riley is in the early stages of the virus.
Riley hasn't been able to keep any food down since the debilitating nausea began, and her fatigue has made it hard for her to do anything other than sleep. We've put her on an IV to replace the electrolytes she loses. All we can really do is treat her symptoms as they come. Let's go check on her.
My whole body aches. I can't even get out of bed because I'm so weak, and everything hurts.
Riley hasn't had any major illnesses before, so her immune system's rather strong. But we can't rely on that, just because this disease escalates so rapidly.
I wish I had known this would happen. I feel like a zoo animal under quarantine.
The quarantine is necessary for your safety and the hospital's. You're responding well to the treatment, as we identified it early, so I have much confidence in your recovery. Unfortunately, some symptoms may linger after the recovery, such as insomnia and joint pain, but we can prescribe you medication to help treat that. I expect Riley to survive. She was already in a controlled and cautious environment. Luckily, after thorough investigation, it's been determined that she hasn't made any contact with anyone after displaying symptoms. It's just so unfortunate that Ebola victims in West Africa can't get the same attentive care that American patients do.
The spread of Ebola in West Africa was caused by close contact and late treatment and resulted in the confirmed infection of 15,227 and death of 11,310 West Africans. That is nearly a 75% death rate.
So Dr. Ferry, in a world full of germs, do you think that we will ever be able to get rid of all of these diseases, or will a new one pop up every time we try to get rid of the older ones?
Bacteria and viruses have an incredible capability to evolve very quickly. For example, the common cold and flu have innumerable strains that continue to evolve, and that's why you're still susceptible to the flu even if you have a vaccine. The vaccine protects from whatever strain is projected to be the most common in the coming season, but not all the strains. West African Ebola is a good example of a more serious disease that evolved from an earlier strain.
What about people's reactions to these illnesses may have changed over the past couple of centuries?
As modern medicine has allowed for quicker and smarter recoveries, people have been able to rely on science to eventually find a cure for a disease before an entire population is wiped out. However, technology has not only allowed for better aid, it has also made the spread of some diseases easier. With fast travel such as planes, diseases can travel at exponentially greater rates than before. In a time when ships that sailed for months on end traveled across great lengths, it was almost impossible for a disease to go undetected in transit, because sooner or later the symptoms would show up during the voyage. Nowadays, a serious disease that can be mistaken for a simple cold can travel thousands of miles in just hours. This causes a widespread panic over who has been exposed to the diseases.
Is that similar to the outbreak of smallpox several centuries ago?
They didn't have the information that we have today, and the Europeans may have noticed that their people weren't getting as ill as the natives were. So if the natives are getting sick and dying, then that means more resources and space for the Europeans, right? So why help the natives if their losses are your gains?
That makes sense for hundreds of years ago, but surely we don't think that way now.
Another contribution to the overall apathetic reaction to modern diseases could be a false sense of invincibility. That feeling that it could never happen to me causes people to think that they can't be hurt by something, even when it's killing millions of others. Even if it's virtually impossible for a country to feel the full effects of a disease, the people in the hot zones still suffer. If people don't care enough to fund research and treatment of these diseases, they're just as deadly as they were in the 1500s.